Daf Nun Gimel Amud Aleph will begin Daf Nun Beis Amud Beis, 5 lines from the bottom. We learned earlier that Rabbi Eloi cut down a date tree, a palm tree bearing dates in the Shemitah year. The question is, how could he do that? The Torah says, La'achlav loy lahefset. The Gemara suggested that he follows the opinion of the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan argue on Rav Yosi. Rav Yosi says that it's considered to be a pre even at the stage where it's only buds, in the early stages. But the Rabbanan say no, unripe fruit is not considered fruit, and therefore there would be no Isser for cutting down the tree in the Shemitah year. Maskevla Rav Shimi Minhardo, he asks the following kasha, Umi pligi Rabbanan led the Rav Yosi Bishari Lonais. Do the Rabbanan argue with Rav Yosi on other trees? Do they argue on their trees that other trees other than grapes, do they argue? We'll see from the following that they also agree that in the unripe stage, in the bud stage, that it is considered a peri. But we learned in the Mishnah, at what stage do we say that you are not allowed to cut down the trees in the Shemitah year? They say all trees from the time that they first bring forth. So Rashi over here says leaves. When the leaves start to come, they grow the leaves in the month of Nisan, then already it's also. Rabbi Kiva Eger and the Gilyon Hashas, Zeichensu the Gemara and Brachas, where Rashi says differently. He says not when the leaves form, but it's when the fruit, when it starts to bud, when the buds are formed. And the Rashash says, as we'll see from the Gemara coming up, that l'chera, the shot in Rashi and Brachas is meduyek, because the kasha that the Gemara will bring is really based on that assumption, that it means not with the leaves, when the fruit first appears, forms. Like Component Beis Shammai says, called Ilonas Mishayitzi, Ubeis Hill Oimrim Acharuvim Mishayisharshu. Beis Hill says, if you're talking about Charuvim, carob trees, boxers, that's when the fruit starts to form chains. It now hangs down, it looks like a chain. Vagifanim, if we're talking about grapes, grapevines, Mishay agree, when they have the grapes the size of a girua, which we'll see in a moment what that means. And the olive trees, when they form a nitz. A nitz is the shomer around the olive, the calyx around the olive. But when it's talking about other fruit, by other trees, it's mishayitziu. And when they first bring the fruit, when the fruit starts to first form. Va'amar Rav Asi, and Rav Asi says, it says by the grapevine. It says girua, he says, hu boiser, hu giru, hu pululavan. Boiser is the same as girua. It's one of the same, they're synonyms, it's referring to the same thing. And similarly, pol halavan, the white bean. Frank the Gemara, pol halavan, sakadaitach, a white bean. What does a white bean have to do with grapes? Elaema shiura kapul halavan. What it means to say is that the shiur, the size of the girua, and the size of the nets, and the boiser and the girua, the size of it is the same as the pul halavan, as the white bean. It's when it forms a fruit as large as a pul halavan of a white bean. So that's what it means, boiser, girua, upul halavan. Now what do we see from here? Uman Shamad Lay the Amr Boiser in Smadar Loy. Who's the one that holds the shita is that it's by the grapevine, by the grapes, it's when it's a shear of a boiser, where it's that size, where it's the size of a boiser, meaning the size of a white bean. But Smadar Loy, but not the grape bud, not when it's only so small that it's only the size of a bud, it doesn't have the shear. It's too small, and therefore the Isser doesn't apply. Who's the one that holds that way? It's the Rabbanan. It's the Rabbanan, because Rav Yosi says even when it's smaller, when it's even smaller than that, when it's in the grape bud, it's still considered to be a fruit. Now, what do we see? So, Al Korcha, this must be the Shita of the Rabbanan, not Rav Yosi. Uketane shara kol helonis mishayetziu, and it says that all other trees mishayetziu. So therefore, how could Rabbi Loyev cut down the tree, even if we say he's going according to the Shita of the Rabbanan? But even the Rabbanan say mishara kol is mishayetziu. So how could he cut it down? El Rabbi Loyev benis chonikas. We have to say that he cut down the tree is a male palm tree, and the dates never fully ripen, and therefore those fruit and are not considered to be the fruit to and have the isser of shvius. So therefore it's not considered destroying the fruit by cutting down the tree, because the fruit never really ripens on the tree. They pick it and they put it in a kli, in a vessel, to ripen, but it doesn't ripen on the tree. So by cutting down the tree, you're not destroying the fruit. If the fruit would ripen on the tree, then you'd be destroying the fruit by cutting down the tree and have it now cut down so it cannot ripen. But if it's not going to ripen on the tree anyway, there is no lehefset over here. It ripens in the kli. So therefore, what we're saying over here, enochanani, we're saying that it is considered a fruit, and if it would be a regular palm tree, then we would say that it would be also to cut down the tree on shvius, because even though it's so small, it is considered a fruit, but we're talking about nischani. So on Rabbanon, we learn in the Brisa, what is the time of beer? Well, there is a time of beer is when you can eat it from the house, when it's still available in the fields. When it's no longer available for the chayes in the fields, then there is a time of biur, and you have to remove it from your house, and you have to either destroy it or be mafker it. What is the Brisa is going to discuss the different stages of biur. So, as far as grapes are concerned, we can eat the grapes until, what is this mana biur? Until the vines of Oichel in the region of Oichel are depleted. When there's no longer any grapes on the vines in that region, then you know that there's no grapes available, because that's the region which gets depleted last. So you can eat the grapes, and on the basis of these grapes that are in Oichel, but when there's no longer grapes in Oichel, in that area called Oichel, then that's the zman of beer, and you have to remove the grapes. So you can eat them on Oichel by Novim Achichul. But but if you know that there are ones that are later than depleted later, and there are those grapes are still available, then it's mutter. Then you can eat relying on them. As far as olives are concerned, the latest region is Tekai. And then as long as there are olives over there, you can eat the olives. When it's depleted over there, then you know it's depleted everywhere. Rabbi Lezer Eimer, he says, he says, no, it's gush cholav is the latest one. That it's mutter to eat the olives that you have in the house, as long as an ani, a poor person, could go and search for olives. An ani would be a poor person, searches, and he's poor, so he looks and searches for food to eat. If the ani can find olives, then it's not as man beer. But if he searches and can't find a roiva, that's the size of an olive, that's the measurement rather. That's a measurement of 6 bayim. If you can't find a shiur, a measurement of 6 bayim, loy b'neifa loy be'ikra. If he's ein a moitza loy b'neifa loy be'ikra roiva, he can't find a roiva, 6 bayim, a volume of them in the branches or in the main part of the tree, in the roots or the trunks, the main part of the tree, and then you cannot eat it anymore. That's a zman of biur. So you can eat it and you can rely on it, but only until the point where an ani can find a roiva, whether it's from the branches of the ikr. But if you can't find it, a raiva of olives anymore, then you can't eat it anymore. That's a zman beer. You can eat out if it's talking about dried figs, then it's until the last of the figs of Beis Hini are depleted. So he says, no, that's not it's not the determinant for biur. Beis Hini wasn't mentioned in as far as the regard of biur by shvias. It was mentioned legavi ma'aser. Does not page Beis Hini v'hini v'tuviana chayavim ma'aser. It's mentioned in this context to tell you that they are chayav in ma'aser, that you have to ma'aser from that region. But it's not mentioned as far as biur. You can eat dates from the palm trees until the ones in Tzair have been depleted. Ram Shimon Gamliel says, al shel bein hakifin vein oichlam al shel bein hashitzin. He says, yes, but that's only if you have it, you find the dates on the branches. But if you find them amongst the thorns, that's not considered that it's accessible for the chaya in the fields, because even though the dates are there, but the chayas can't get to it because they're stuck among the thorns, the animals will get injured there, so they're not going to be able to extract the dates, so that's not considered accessible. So it has to be that you can find them in the branches, but not amongst the thorns. Vremino will ask you a stira. It says the cutoff date is mana beer. If you're talking about grapes, it's until Pesach. Bezesim arat seres. In olives, it's until Shuas. Begregeres ad Hanukkah. Dried figs until Hanukkah. Bitzmorim, if it's dates, it's ad Hapurim until Purim. Va'amar Rabbi B. He said, he switched the last two cases. He switched the last two cases with the Tmorim and the Gregoris, and it's not Gregoris ad Hanukkah, it's Tmorim ad Hanukkah. And it's not Tmorim ad Purim, it's Gregoris ad until Purim. So I'll call upon him. In any event, we have a kasha because we see the cutoff dates are on these specific times. Yes, we're talking about Atzeres, so we're talking about Hanukkah or Purim, etc., or Pesach. So we see that there's a specific cutoff date. It doesn't depend on if you can find it in a particular region. The Gemara answer is it's really the same shear. When we talk about the Tmorim, for instance, and we talk about Atzair, so that coincides, generally speaking, it coincides with Purim. It's easy a Chad Shiura. Alternatively, I'll answer a different teretz. It says clearly if there's a later date, then you can eat it based on the later date. Meaning, it's given the one brisa gives a fixed time. It gives the dates. It gives the date of Purim. It gives the Pesach, Shavuos, etc. It gives a fixed date. But however, if a later date is if you do find it in the specific areas, in the specific regions, if you do find it at a later date than that, you can rely on that later time if it's accessible, if you find it available, if it has not been depleted in those other regions that were mentioned. Tanya, we learned the brisa of Shimon Gamliel, Simon Lahar Milip. How do you know what a mountain area is? If you have galnut trees, we'll see what it's nagay. I mean, if you see a mountain, you see a mountain, but we'll see why is it specific that it has to have galnut trees. What's it nagay? Simen la'makim, the valleys are the kolim, palm date trees. Simen l'necholim konim. The simen for necholim, streams, is konim. We have reeds. Simen l'shvela. If you're simen of a plain, a flat area, is shikma. Simen l'shvela is a shikma, sycamore trees. Even though it's not a riot to this last point, but we do have an allusion to it. Shenemar says in the pasuk, "V'yitin hamelech as a kesev Yerushalayim ka'avanim," that the king made silver. There's so much silver in Yerushalayim, it was as commonplace as stones. Ves ha'arozim nasan kashikma, and the cedar trees, there were so many cedar trees, were as much as like shikma, as sycamores. Asher b'shvela laroiv. And it says that they were on the plains, there were so many of them, it's like the sycamore trees, that the abundance of them that are on the plains. But it's only a zecher l'dover, it's not a rai l'dover, because, as Rashi mentions, because, yes, if it has sycamore trees, then it's called, that's where they commonly are found, and they're commonly found on the plains. But you don't see clearly as a raya that if it doesn't have sycamore trees, it's not called a plain. So now the Gemara explains. Simen laharim milin. The simen for the mountain areas are the simen laharim milin, simen ala mokim dekolim. So the simen for the mountains are galna trees, and for the valleys, date trees, date palm trees. Nafkamina, it's a nafkamina lebikurim, as far as bikurim. Now, we learn out a Zereshava of Eretz, from Eretz, from the Shivas Aminim Shishtav Eretz Yisrael, that the Bikurim are brought dafka from Zion Minim. And it also has to be the Zion Minim that Eretz Yisrael was praised with. So it has to be superior, the superior fruit from the Zion Minim. So therefore, this non ein mevim bikurim ela mishivas aminim. You can only bring the bikurim from the shivas aminim veloim dekolim shebaharim, but not from the kolim on the mountains. That's not called superior; that's inferior. Veloim mipere sheba mokim, and not from the grains that are in the valleys. So similar harim milim, where you know what the areas that have galnut trees, they're considered mountain areas, and therefore they're considered a mountain area in so far as that you can't bring the dates from that area. So where do you see? Yes, you see a mountain. You see there's mountain regions, but specifically, what areas can you not bring the dates for the Shivas Aminim? If you have the galnut trees, there, those high areas, there are possible to bring the dates from there. They're considered inferior. Similar, the streams, the similar for this reads, nafkamina lachalesa. It's a nafkamina that from the case of the egla arufa, you have to, by the egla arufa, you have to decapitate it in the nachal. It has to be done in a nachal. How do we define that? How do we define this nachal? If it has konim over there, then we know that it's defined as a nachal, and therefore it's a place that is fit, it's roy, it's kosher to do the egla arufa, the arufa of the egla. If they found a dead body lying around, they don't know who the killer was, then the closest city has to bring a egla arufa and they decapitate it in the nachal. Similar shvela shikma, for plains, it's the sycamore tree. Nafkamina l'mekach u'memkar. It's a nafkamina for buying and selling, for mekach u'memkar, that if a person makes an agreement, there's a contract to sell a plain, so it has to have sycamore trees. If it doesn't, then it's a mekach tos. So Gemara answers, now once you've come on to this nafkamina, kulanam l'mekach u'memkar, in all of these cases, that's a nafkamina l'mekach u'memkar. Then it's if a person makes in any of these cases where he has contracts to sell a mountain or a stream, it has to have those characteristics. It has to have those characteristics to be a binding sale. Zok the Mishnah, Malkum Shanagu Limkar Behemadaka L'Nochrim, in a place where the minig is to allow to sell a Behemadaka to the Nochrim, then Moichrim you're allowed to do it. Or Malkum Shaloi Nagu Limkar Ein Moichrim. In a place where the minig is not to, then you can. So what's the basis of this? Really, the basis that we'll see is Behemagasa you can't. As the Mishnah says in the next line, and we call Mokamein Moichlim Behemagasa, but in any place, it does not tell you on minig, there's an issur to sell a Behemagasa to a Nochri. The Isser to sell a behema gasa is a behema gasa like a shore, etc. That does work. So that's used for work. So we're afraid that if you sell a behema gasa to a goy, that you might rent it to him, you might lend it to him. Now, if you do, the Yisrael, if he lends it to him or rents it to him, he's still the owner. And if the Nachri then does work with the animal on Shabbos, then the Yisrael's animal is working on Shabbos, and he's mitzvah on Shvisas Behemta to make sure his animal doesn't work on Shabbos. Therefore, we asked a behema gasa to a Nachri. Now, a behema daka, like a sheep, a goat, they don't do work. So, strictly speaking, you should be mutter. So, it's not included in the gzeira. However, there's a minig not to, because it might get confused with the behema gasa. So that, the behema daka is totally on a minig. The behema gasa is also. Now, even though these are not in a stage where they're royal hamalacha, but people won't be able to differentiate, and therefore they'll sell them even behema gasas that are royal hamalacha, and therefore they are also. Rabbi Yehuda, however, Rabbi Yehuda mater be-shvura. He says with a maimed one it's mutter, because the maimed one will, the guy is not going to keep it for a long time in his rishus, and he's going to shacht it, and he's not going to keep it there, so people won't see it, Yidden won't see it in his rishus, and they won't come to confuse it with a behema gasa that's royal alamalacha. Ben Beseira matir besus. Another exception is Ben Beseira is matir with a horse. Why is he matir with a horse? Because a horse is used for riding, not to do malacha. Now, to ride on an animal, to ride on a horse is a shus. Even if the Nochri does ride on the animal on Shabbos, there is no Isser for the Nochri to ride on the animal, and it's not considered a melacha, it's not considered a melacha for the horse to carry the person who's riding. It's not considered a melacha because chai noises atzma. If the Isser is a derabanan, it's a drabanan that if you use the ride on the horse, you might come to be kaitzer, you might come to do malacha, cut down branches, etc. So therefore, there is no, strictly speaking, even if there is shelas chiras, it doesn't come to malacha. And in any event, it's only an isser drabanan, so he says there's no gzeira by a horse. Malkum shenago lechol atzli, and another minig is a malkum shenago lechol atzli and leil pesachim, in a place where the minig is to eat roasted meat on leil pesach. Then oichlim, you're allowed to do it. Malkum shenago shaloi lechol ein oichlim, in a place where the minig is not to, then they don't. And the basis of the minig not to is because it looks like that it is the korban pesach. The korban pesach is roasted, and people will think that he's eating the korban pesach outside of Yerushalayim. He's eating it in a place where, and it's state of tumor outside of Yerushalayim, and therefore the minig is not to eat roasted meat. But this is totally on a minig and totally on the minig of malkum. Amar V'Yuram Arav, Zak the Gemara, Amar V'Yuram Arav, also Loi La'aram Shemar, Basar Pesach. It's also a person to say that this meat is for Korban Pesach, is for Pesach. Now, for the Korban Pesach, it's also even to say, certainly for the Korban Pesach, was even also to say that this is for Pesach. Why is that? Mibnei Shenira Kim Makdish Behemtei. Because it looks like he's being makdish the animal, eating kachem, the korban pesach, outside Yerushalayim. Now, Rashi learns what we're referring to over here is he has the meat. Now, you're not makdish a meat, you're makdish an animal for the korban pesach. So Rashi therefore learns that when people might think that he's being makdish this meat for the purposes of a korban pesach, which he's going to use to buy a korban pesach with it and use it for the hakrava of a korban pesach, so they'll think that you can have a bimakriv or eat a korban pesach b'chutz. Taisus argues on that because he says that's not the mashmos of it. He says people will think what he means to say he was makdish it previously, and it's for a korban pesach while it was an animal, it was a behemoth, he was makdish it for korban pesach. The Rosh says there's enough gemina between the two. According to the Taisus pshat, is it would only apply if it's an animal that is roy for a korban pesach. If it is a sedge, it wouldn't apply to an animal that's not roy for a korban pesach. According to Rashi, it could apply to any meat because he could use the money for the the Korban Pesach. Amar Rav Papa Davke Bosi says this only applies to the meat. Aval chiti loy. If a person says that this wheat is for Pesach, it doesn't know. We don't assume that he means to say that he's going to use the monetary value of it for a Korban Pesach. What does he mean to say? Because we'll say the minter lepilcha kamer. He means to say is he's going to save it. He's going to guard it for Pesach, to use it for the Pesach, to use it for the, he'll eat it and use it for the matzah for Pesach.